Next up is Derek Lee. Derek is a program manager who is working with Logic Apps with a strong focus on, among other things, user experience. For today's session, Derek has created an entertaining and informative recording in which he tells a bit about the history of Logic Apps, where we are today, and how its future looks like. During the playback, Derek and a bunch of his colleagues are waiting in the Q&A to take your questions. Over to Derek.
Hello and welcome. In this session on Logic Apps, we'll talk about the past, look at the present, and imagine the future for Logic Apps. Come July this year, we'll mark the 5-year anniversary for Logic Apps. The service first became generally available on July the 26th, 2016. And since then, so much have happened. They say, to know where you're going, you must know where you came from. So we put together a montage of the memorable moments of Logic Apps that I think you will find interesting. So let's roll the tape.
Our vision, our roadmap for Logic Apps is to democratize integration.
Going live. Okay, we should be live. Awesome. Great. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first ever Logic Apps Live webcast. We're really excited to be doing this. This is the first time we've been doing it, so we hope that you stay engaged, you let us know how it goes, and hopefully we'll be doing more of these. We will be doing one next month and the month after, and we're really excited. To get started, let me just introduce myself. I'm Jeff Holland. I'm a program manager here in Azure for Logic Apps, and I'm joined today by Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lamb. I'm a principal program manager on Logic Apps, and I'm excited to share some stuff later on at the end of the broadcast on what we're doing in the future.
That's right, some cool stuff that we've both released and stuff that's coming up. So this is a really simple Logic app that I'll just walk through quickly. And what this Logic app is doing is you'll see I've got a beginning. I have 2 actions. These are both just using the Microsoft SQL connector that comes with Logic Apps. And what this first action does is it's going to do a select to see if I already have a customer with this email address that I'm going to pass in. And I know if I already have a customer with this email address, for this purpose, I'm going to say they're already in the database. I don't want to duplicate the entry. So in the second step, it's going to receive the output of this first step. And I have a condition here. You notice it says, if this is empty, so if my first step was empty, then go ahead and insert the customer in. But what's nice about this is if I do this first step and I return a user, which means it's already in the database, Logic Apps is automatically going to skip this second step. I'm not going to get duplicate data. There it goes. Live. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Logic Apps webcast. We're exciting. This is kind of a special, on a very special episode of Azure Logic Apps Live.
Yes.
So we're excited to be here to go over some exciting announcements. Logic Apps reached general availability yesterday, so that's the big one. We're very excited as a team. Yep, big day for everyone. The first one I want to show is just run monitoring view. So I have all these runs that have been running for this Logic app. You can see it even ran this morning at 11 a.m., which is interesting because this is the text message Logic app. So someone's still texting this phone number to trigger this Logic app. But when I open this Logic app, what it's actually running is this run monitoring view, which is going to load up the designer so that we can see the different steps of our workflow. And let me maximize this since this is a little bit bigger one. But I can see all of the pieces that happened within this workflow. I can click into them to see what the different statuses were. I can see the inputs and outputs. We're not planning on stopping at all. We're going to continue to improve the platform. But at the same time, it is a generally available service. You can bet your money on this, right? You can put production workloads on Logic Apps. You can trust that it's going to be up and reliable and do all those things that you need it to do. While at the same time, we're going to make sure that we're continuing and evolving and adding the features that you care about most. So keep that channel open with us. Let us know what you care about, what you want to see us work on next.
Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. It's another episode of Azure Friday. I'm here right now with Kevin Lamb and Jeff Holland. How's it going?
Awesome.
Great. So Logic Apps, it's now GA. That means general availability. So it's released.
That's right.
So what's going on? What's new with Logic Apps right now?
Well, everything is new. We've done a lot of work to transition it from our preview and added a lot of great features to it. And one of the things that we're doing with Logic Apps is really pushing the whole integration story in the cloud with Azure and having Logic Apps as that core of that integration story.
Okay.
So I'm going to have Logic Apps handle all this for me, and I actually want to get an email whenever someone submits a form, and I want to be able to flag
whether or not it's a bug or whether or not it's just a comment. So we're going to go ahead and add an action. And you see here, now we have the nice long list of all of the actions we support.
I like the new designer.
Yeah, it's much more pleasant than the last one we saw a few months ago.
Yeah, it's intuitive. All right, so what does that mean, enterprise integration?
What does that mean? Well, what that means is we have a number of features that are new. They previewed in the end of June for Logic Apps, which are around enterprise scenarios. So these are really two key pieces, which are XML processing and validation and transformation that people have to do, and typically enterprises have to do these things to transform one message format to another, and B2B. And B2B is the kind of protocols that have been around for like a really long time, Edifact, X12, and also AS2 for doing secure communications between business partners.
Yeah, this is stuff that I've had to do, gosh, 12, 13 years ago with BizTalk, and it wasn't super fun, but BizTalk took care of it, and we would kind of left hand, right hand, we always called it. Pull this from the left hand, put that to the right hand. Transformation work.
That's right, yeah, and it's really around, how do we cloud enable those types of processes which have typically resided on premises, and then how do we get these running in the cloud? Because especially for like B2B, that data is leaving the organization anyway and going to a business partner, so it's an ideal place to be able to run these workloads in a scalable way, massive scale in Azure, and getting all the flexibility and connectivity as well as access to other Azure services that you get in Logic Apps, all kind of as part of the overall process.
Presumably also an opportunity to bring in more new things like OneDrive or Box that didn't exist when we started doing this work in the old days.
Yeah, this is not just about kind of FTP and file anymore. You can take and get stuff from anywhere using any of the Azure services with Logic Apps. Yeah.
All right.
Yep, so if I open up the other artifact that I had on my desktop there, this is a Logic app, which we call a Veta pipeline. So this is, again, a traditional processing pattern for BizTalk, where you would take a request, in this case is over HTTP, and then validate that. So I'm going to be receiving XML, or at least I expect to receive validate XML. I'm going to validate that against a schema. And when I open this up, you can see I picked the schema here. There it is, yeah. And if I just click the drop down, I would see all the schemas. I've only got one because there's only one integration account. And I pass in, the content that was received, and then I want to do a transformation on it. It works the same way, Here I just specify again the map.
And then I see your function container.
You see my function container.
And I'm asking, where was this 10 years ago? Where was Azure and Logic Apps and all of this great stuff when I was doing this work so many years ago?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Ho.
Ho. Ho.
Nice. Yes. Well, we didn't practice. We probably should practice that one. The big news.
Dum, dum, dum.
Here we go.
No build-up.
No build-up, yes. We've seen the drum roll or the sleigh bells or something, right? So the Enterprise Integration Pack has GA'd today.
Yes. That really is applause-worthy. There's some pretty beefy stuff in here.
There is, yeah. Just if you're not familiar with what it is, this is our enterprise integration, kind of business-to-business, EDI, XML processing, things like mapping, transformation, XML validation, flat file conversion, X12, Edifact, and AS2 processing, as well as the integration account, which lets you manage all of that stuff and upload your schemas and maps and everything.
Good day, everyone.
Good day. Yeah. Oh, it's not upside down.
Oh, that's right. Here is our experiment of doing Logic Apps live from Gold Coast, Australia.
Yeah.
We're hoping the quality is good enough that you can see us in this beautiful sun with the beautiful backdrop, that you can hear us with this beautiful microphone. I guess it's probably good they can't really see our faces too well. But yeah, we're live here from Australia Ignite. We've had a great chance to get to talk to a lot of you, to meet with people. We had a session on Wednesday.
Hey there, this is Seth Wires from Channel 9 coming to you from the Washington State Convention Center for the 2017 edition of Build. I'm here with a special guest to talk about Logic Apps.
The first thing it's going to do is do some optical character recognition. It takes that image and parses it out. I'm actually calling an Azure function here to clean it up because I'm not interested in everything in that because it kind of gives me all the kind of labels and everything else. We have a few data operations like parse JSON. Again, I provided schema for this, and this turns what I had originally as an image. It's going to convert that to JSON. And the reason for doing that is because it makes it very easy to do things like a lookup of the customer. Are they an existing customer, right? I just pass in the company name. You can see it now understands. This was an image, right? It understands now all the different fields in the image.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could connect all the apps and services your business relies on? Welcome to Azure Logic Apps. Easy way to automate many of the workflows you have in place without writing a single line of code.
It's really important for us, though, when we look at why are we here, we really wanted to bring all of our thought leaders to this event. And they're here because they want to meet and talk with you. They want to find out, what are we doing right? What areas do we need to make course corrections on?
I was browsing your store and I love this t-shirt, but it's maybe a size or too small for me. So have you got any other larger ones in
Well,
stock?
sure. Let me check that for you really quick. So all I need to do is to point my camera at this barcode. It should be recognized instantly.
The barcode's bigger than the t-shirt.
We went to extensive lengths to make this as realistic as possible.
I'm very excited to announce the private preview of SAP Trigger that would allow you to receive messages from the SAP system into the Logic apps.
So we have X12 and artifact support and AS2, and we've had those for a while. We're working on additional B2B formats.
For all your B2B dorks out there.
Yeah, you keep calling me a dork. You realize what you do.
Oh, is that you? I'm sorry. We also have VS Code. Here's that same Logic app. Not only can we see, yes, that same Logic app, but we've added this new ability to see it in the designer. So we can see it side by side.
You can see I have this inline code action where I can write JavaScript code right from within Logic apps. I have this token called workflow context that gives me access to all the data that I have from this dynamic content picker. So I can just click on documents and boom, I have this token.
To know where you're going, you really need to know where you've come from. You really need to understand, the mission that we set out to achieve back in 2015, back when we created the Logic Apps team. And the first thing we set out to achieve is really to democratize integration, really to open it up, to take it from being a specialist skill set where only kind of secret knowledge and practitioners who did this full time all the time, we could open this up and provide the same capabilities in a simpler way for different audiences. The second thing we did, we set out, we wanted to be a leader in this space. Microsoft's always been there for the past 20 years. And with various levels of success, not just with BizTalk, but SSIS and other integration products, we really wanted this time to make sure that we got recognized and understood as being heavily invested in this space with you all in terms of what we set out to achieve. And then the third thing was to make sure we built a rich ecosystem around this. And really for us in Logic Apps, this really meant about ubiquitous connectivity, that you didn't have to think about whether we had a connector for that thing, we just had one. There's a connector for that. One continuum. You can start from one place and progress. You can start with Flow, you can move to Logic Apps, you can start with a Power Platform and integrate that with Azure as well. So there's no cliffs, there's no sharp edges, there's no way of getting into trouble with this stuff. You can just dive in and start creating and use the pieces that make sense and bring in more over time as it required. Some of you are at least aware that last year was the first year we actually made it in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is our kind of Bible of enterprise integration platform as a service. And this year we did the same thing, which is just fantastic. It was a real validation for us that we're still going in the right direction with all of you in terms of the capabilities we're shipping and the commitment we're making to this space, that we just continue to invest, we continue to ship new features, and we're going to continue to do all of that. And then the third thing is a rich ecosystem. We have nearly 300 connectors today. Far more than we've ever had in the past for any of our server-based products. It's incredible how many connectors we ship every year.
So what you see here, this is the Logic Apps Designer. Hopefully many of you are familiar with this. But what we've done is actually made this rehostable on the Azure Functions runtime. Now, the reasons we did this were threefold. We wanted the ability to be able to run Logic Apps anywhere. So anywhere the functions can run, which is either in Azure, either standalone on bare metal VMs, or you can run it as part of app service, or in Kubernetes, running in your own environments on-prem, or in a local dev environment where you're using VS Code and you've got that local dev loop of authoring and running Logic Apps locally. We have, hopefully you're aware, we have a new Logic Apps runtime, which has been containerized.
Having this side-by-side, I can easily spot the action that I want to investigate and go directly to that action with less scrolling in this new designer.
We'll use the Azure Communication Service Connector to send a reply back to the user with the information we just retrieved from the database. Now, what's cool about this is I'm using the exact same ACSCon connection object that I created while writing my function code. So I'm able to reuse that API connection resource across multiple services within Azure.
The team ethos is that integration really is everything to us. Everything comes back in terms of the way you build modern applications today, in terms of how they're going to connect, not just to each other, but also to people to build experiences around the data, around the usage of those applications and the functionality that they consist of, as easy, as friction-free way as possible.
With the Logic App being able to be deployed as a separate build package, the developer and integration designer can now singularly focus on creating workflows, and other concerns such as the infrastructure as code side can be handled by the operational specialists. Our goal is to simplify the deployment process for everyone, to help people focus on what they need to do to build awesome workflows and faster.
So today, here at Build, we're pleased to announce the general availability of the new Logic Apps runtime. This marks a major milestone for Logic Apps and the biggest leap forward since the initial release of Logic App 5 years ago. I hope you liked the video. So now let's take a look at Logic App as it is today. Logic App is designed for effortless integration. With the Visual Designer, you can quickly and easily build workflows, often without having to write a single line of code. The experience is available on Azure Portal, in Visual Studio Code, as well as in Visual Studio, but also available programmatically through REST APIs, SDKs, and CLIs. Logic App is deeply integrated with other key Azure services such as Azure Functions, API Management, Service Bus, Event Grid, Cosmos DB, and so on. And the Logic App engine is highly resilient, designed for running mission-critical workload. With Logic Apps, you can connect to more than 400 different services out of box, services inside Azure, by Microsoft, or from third parties. You can connect to systems on the cloud, on premises, or bridge the gap between the two using tools and features such as virtual network integration and on-premises data gateway. Logic App takes care of the task of figuring out which API to use, which version to call, how to pass the payload, and the secure storage and renewal of authentication information so you can focus on building the business logic. And lastly, you can build custom connectors connecting to your own internal proprietary system with ease. You can use codeful or codeless connectors to connect to REST APIs or SOAP endpoint. And it's worth calling out that Microsoft has been recognized by Gartner as the leader in the Magic Quadrant for Enterprise Integration as a Service 3 years in a row. So now, let's take a look at what are some of the basic building blocks for Logic Apps so you can start writing your own Logic Apps. Every workflow starts with a trigger. There are 3 kinds of triggers. Request, so that the Logic App can be invoked whenever a request is being sent to an endpoint. So Logic App itself surfaces as a RESTful API. An event trigger, so that the Logic App is triggered to respond to an event that has happened. Whenever a new message appears in the service bus queue, whenever a new row is inserted into a SQL database, whenever a new email arrived in my inbox, or whenever a sales order appears in my SAP system. And lastly, it can be timer-based, so Logic App runs on a predefined schedule. Run Logic App every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, every day, or run Logic Apps every 15 minutes, Monday through Friday, between 9 and 5. After the trigger, you can add one or many actions. There are control flow actions, such as if-else condition, switch case, for loop, and do until loop. There are utility functions to help you join an array, filter or select some object, or to create a table so you can format it as an HTML and send it via email. There are variable actions to allow you to initialize, increment, decrement, or append to variables. You can use inline code to write JavaScript code inline for some more complex data processing. It is great for regular expression or array manipulations and alike. There are data operations, so you can validate or transform XML using XSLT map. You can perform operations similarly on a JSON object using a liquid map. And lastly, there is of course the connector actions. So you can insert a row into a SQL database, you can send a message to service bus, or you can populate a sales order in your SAP system, create a personnel in your dynamic HR system, and so on. Next, let's compare and contrast the two options we have for logic apps: consumption and standard. Consumption logic app runs on Azure in a fully managed fashion. With platform as a service offering, you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure, but rather can focus on building the best workflow to suit your needs. You can extend consumption logic apps using codeless custom connectors by supplying an open API definition for a RESTful API or the WSDL file for a SOAP endpoint. And you can deploy consumption logic apps using Azure Resource Manager deployment templates. On the other hand, with standard logic apps, you can run it in Azure in a fully managed way on top of App Service, but you can also run it locally for your development and debugging purpose. You can even run it through Azure Arc in your Kubernetes clusters. The new runtime, Standard Logic App, is a single tenant offering. And when running on top of App Service Plan, you get rich network connectivities such as virtual network integration and private endpoints. With Standard Logic Apps, rather than pay per action, you can choose the compute and storage to best fit your requirements and pay for those underlying structures with hosting plan and storage cost. You can extend standard logic apps using not only codeless custom connectors, but also codeful custom connectors, which allows you to write codeful custom connectors and have it running right alongside the workflow engine to allow high performance, low latency type of workloads. When it comes to DevOps, you can implement an infrastructure as code approach and have the Logic App infrastructure deployed via GitHub Action or Azure DevOps pipeline, and then continue to iterate on your workflow implementations separately. Furthermore, the standard new Logic Apps runtime also comes with a newly designed workflow designer, which separates the canvas, which is used for the visualization of the workflow and interdependencies between actions, away from the panel, which is used for configuration for each and every action. We also introduced a new concept of stateless workflows. State workflows skip the storage of individual input and output for actions into storage, but rather keep them in the memory. Therefore, it is highly performant and great for scenarios such as request response or processing IoT events or moving messages around. And it is worth to note that the standard Logic Apps running on top of App Service also integrate with Application Insights. So you can send logs to the single Application Insight instance that your other Azure services also send logs to, which enables you a holistic application monitoring experience across different resources. So let's take a look at a quick demo of the new Logic Apps runtime. We'll be showing the local development and debugging experience using VS Code and the new workflow designer. We'll look at the DevOps experience on how we can take this project from my local machine up into Azure. And then we'll see what the experience is like inside the Azure portal and beyond. Let's get started. In this demo, I will be showing the standard logic apps, which just reached general availability last week during build. I have all the dependencies already installed on my computer, the Azure Function Core tools, VS Code extension for Logic App Standard, and the Azure Write Storage emulator. I will be doing the demo on a Windows machine, but everything I'm showing here is also possible on macOS and/or Linux. To begin, let me just make sure that Azure Write is running. And then I will create a local project for Logic App Standard from VS Code. Let's call it Integrate Demo. With Logic App Standard, you can have multiple workflows in the same Logic App resource. This is great for organizational purpose. Let's go ahead and create a stateful workflow and give it a name. With the project open, let's open the workflow in Designer View. Like I mentioned earlier in the session, there are three types of triggers in Logic Apps: request, event, and timer. We'll use the request trigger for this demo because it's easy for us to test that way. So let's start with a simple case, shall we? Everyone loves a good Hello World demo, so let's do that first. And it is super easy to do in Logic Apps. The request trigger will expose the Logic App as a RESTful API, so we just need to add a response action. And in our case, it will return Hello World to the caller. Let's test that really quick. I will save the workflow and start a local debugging session. As you can see from the output window, the Azure Function runtime is starting. This is what the standard Logic App is built upon and what enables it to be rehostable and containerized. Now that the runtime has successfully started, I can go to the overview page of the workflow by right-clicking on the file and select Overview. Here I can find the URL for the workflow, and you will notice that the host name is localhost, indicating that we're running it locally rather than in Azure. I will copy the URL and switch to this other blade to make a call to it using REST Client, a great little tool to test REST APIs from right within VS Code. And here you can see that Hello World is returned on the right-hand side. Great. Now let's make it a little more interesting. You can see that I already have the sample payload prepared. What I want to do is to invoke the same workflow, but this time providing some data in the request body. And I want the Logic App to return welcome to whatever value I have it there. So if I send in event equals build, I want the Logic App to return welcome to build. If I send in event equals integrate, it will say welcome to integrate. Let's switch back to the workflow designer, and I will start by specifying the request body schema. Here, I'm essentially telling it the incoming data will look like so. And I don't have to know how to generate the schema or how to write the schema myself, but simply by providing a sample, it will generate the schema for me. Now that I have the schema defined, I can go to the response action. I will delete the value hello world we entered previously and enter welcome. Now the next part of the value will be dynamic based on what value is sent in during runtime. So I will choose from this list to use the value of the property event. This is what we call dynamic content, or sometimes workflow token. It allows me to reference the output of a trigger or a previous action super easily by just selecting them from the list, and Logic App will take care of the rest. Alright, let's start debugging again and try it out. I will send this request, and we can see that the workflow responded with welcome to build. Let's update the request payload and change it from build to integrate and send in another request. And just like that, it returns welcome to integrate as expected. We'll continue making this workflow more interesting when we work on it inside the Azure portal. But for now, I want to show you something else. You have already seen that we can run workflow locally. Do you know that you can also debug it locally? Yes, you can set breakpoint and debug a workflow just like you can when working with code. Let me show you how. I will open the workflow.json file for the workflow that we have been working on. This is the JSON representation of the workflow that you saw visually inside the workflow designer, but the JSON file is what will be source controlled. Here you can see that each action is represented as a JSON object. And I can set breakpoint at either the beginning or the end of each action. In our case, let's set it at the beginning of the response action, so that the workflow will receive the request but pause before it responds to the caller. Because I already have the runtime running, we can just send in another request to test. Here you can see the breakpoint has been triggered, and I can review the variables from the debugger. This gives me all the workflow context data that I may care about. Cool. So we looked briefly at both the workflow designer and the code behind. We played with local development and debugging experiences. Now let's take a look at taking what we have built and publishing that to Azure. The easiest way is to simply right-click on the project folder and choose Deploy to Logic App. I want to create a new Logic App resource because this is a brand new local project we have created. And I already have a workflow standard plan that I want to use, so I will pick it. And just like that, the local project that we have been working on is now being deployed to Azure as we speak. Of course, you will be able to do the deployment via GitHub Actions or using Azure DevOps Pipeline. And because the runtime is now built on top of Azure Functions, the experience is also very consistent between the two. To learn more about implementing DevOps and CI/CD best practices for Logic Apps, make sure to tune in to our session on the third day of the Integrate Conference, Advanced Integration with Logic Apps. Now I will switch to Azure Portal and find the Logic App we just deployed. Here you can see that you have the same designer and code view experience you had in VS Code, just now on the web. Let me show you some of the control flow actions as well as connectors here inside Azure Portal. Let's say we want our API to accept a number between 1 and 3. And depends on the number, it will return a list of sessions along with time for each. I will first update the request trigger schema and provide a sample data on how the request may look like. And I will add a condition action. If the value is between 1 and 3, we will retrieve the data from a Cosmos database. And if the input is not between 1 and 3, we'll return an error message. So in the true branch, I will add a Cosmos action to query documents where day equals the input value. And with the results, we will respond it to the caller. In the false branch, we will add another response action, but rather than returning the data, we'll just return an error message indicating that the value is out of range. Let's save the logic app and try it out. I will copy the URL. This time, you will notice the host name is on Azure as expected because the logic app has been deployed. And we'll make a request to it. As you can see, we got a list of sessions for the first day of the Integrate conference in response. All right, given the time we have, I think that's it for the demo. I hope this gives you an overview of the different aspects of Logic App Service, but there's so much more that you can do with it. So I encourage you to try it out yourself, check out our videos and documentations, and also tune in to other sessions during the conference where we will be deep diving into different aspects of the service and its more advanced capabilities. So where are we going? Just like Jeff said in Logic App Live back in 2016, when consumption Logic App became generally available, we're not planning on stopping at all. We'll keep improving and we'll keep innovating. With the standard Logic App now also generally available, we can use more usage and more feedback to help us prioritize. This community in particular has never been shy of providing feedback. So please don't stop and keep them coming. We want to make sure that Logic Apps provide ubiquitous connectivities to each and every system or services that you want to connect to, be it from Azure, by Microsoft, or third parties. We intend for our already rich ecosystem of connectors to grow and provide connectivity to the cloud, on-premises, and across those boundaries. We want to make sure that Logic App can empower everyone to achieve more. We want to see application developers using Logic Apps building richer experiences with ease. We want to see IT pros using Logic Apps to manage resources, manage alerts, and enforce policies. We want to see integration specialists to use Logic App to modernize legacy systems in their journey of digital transformation. We want to see more people using more of Logic Apps to solve more problems. The workflow designer is the centerpiece in all of this. So we want to make sure that it's sleeker, faster, and most importantly, smarter. We want to make sure that the workflow designer not only enables you to build workflows, but helps you to build better workflows. And we want to see Logic Apps running everywhere. Run it on Azure with consumption pay-as-you-go plan, or use the new single-tenant runtime and run it on top of App Service. Run it via Azure Arc on your own Kubernetes cluster, or run it on IoT devices. Run it in a Docker container on an actual container ship fully disconnected from the internet. Run it locally for your own development and debugging and testing. And I mean everywhere. We plan on investing in adding more intelligence to Logic Apps. So that in turn means you will be able to use it to build more intelligent integration solutions. Gone are the days of just moving data from one place to the other. Want to make sure that with Logic Apps, you can build cloud-native integration solutions to power your business so that it's lean, efficient, and smart. Use Logic Apps for data transformation and validation, but also leverage the power of Azure ML to do detections and add intelligence to it. Use Logic Apps to collect data and transfer it to other systems, but visualize it using the Power BI. Use Logic Apps to modernize the point of sale system, but then also add Azure Cognitive Services to it so that you can build an even better experience than before. We want to make sure that you have absolute confidence in using Logic Apps. The highly resilient runtime with at least once execution guarantee is well known and preferred by many. But there is also network security, Key Vault integration for centralized secret management, managed identity, role-based access control, secure input and output, and industry standard and compliance. So please join us on this journey, and here is to the next 5 amazing years.
Covey.co